Hey guys, it's Boston. In today's video, I'm going to be doing a tier list for the best electronics that I have flipped for profit, and we'll be ranking them on a tier list from S rank being the best to D, the worst. Now, for those of you that don't know me, I'm a full-time electronics and phone flipper, so I make a little over $10,000 a month on average doing this. That's all in profit. I've had months of upwards of 12,000. And in worst case scenario, I'm making, around 10 or 11,000 each and every month. It's very repeatable. And I'll just go ahead and show you guys some of the electronics that I've flipped and we'll rank them here. First of all, we've got the AirPods Max. Now, I don't get too many of these, and there are a lot of fakes that go around with the AirPods Max. They're really easy to spot the fakes. But in general, the profit margins aren't anything crazy. I've only sold a couple. That being said, they're not the worst thing ever, so I'd put these at the C tier. Definitely something you can flip, do well on. Nothing great, but definitely something to have in your arsenal and be on the look for when you can get them. Next up is just more of your normal pods. So the in-ear AirPods. Obviously, there's a bunch of fakes with all Apple products, but especially with AirPods Max and even more so the AirPods. Plus, AirPods don't really go for that much. Even like the sealed ones are only like a little over $100 for the newest models. And so generally speaking, obviously the used market for these is terrible. They're kind of just gross too. So I wouldn't even want them. And then with all the fakes, I pretty much just avoid these at all costs unless they are brand new sealed Apple, which I find almost never. So generally speaking, I'm just not buying AirPods. Next thing will be Apple accessories. So it's like the Apple Pencil, Apple mouses, keyboards, the Magic Keyboard for the iPads. In general, I'm not usually hunting for these, but if it's kind of paired with something I buy, for example, if I buy an iPad, a lot of times I just end up getting these because people will just throw it in, whether it be the case or the pencil. Buying them on their own is really not worth it unless you're doing like $5 or $10, at least for the pencils, because I usually sell those around 35, the Pro going for more. And then the Magic Keyboard and cases, it just kind of depends what iPad it is. So obviously for your newer iPads, these can actually be very valuable, sometimes upwards of $200. So those can be really profitable if you can get them for a good deal. That being said, in general, they're not something I'm looking for. It's more of just like a cool bonus if I happen to get them. And for that reason, this is going to go in the C tier. Next up is cameras. And there's obviously just a huge range, or wide range rather, of cameras that you can buy. Obviously, you have lenses that are super valuable. The camera bodies themselves, a lot of times you're going to get stuff together, a whole package of accessories and whatnot. I'm by no means a photographer or a camera expert, but I just know how to look things up on eBay to price them. So that's why I buy cameras, just because I know I can resell them. They're easy to ship. They're small. Throw a little bubble wrap on them and put them in a small box. Basically good to go. Now, some of my best flips ever have been cameras. I bought a camera before that I made $1,200 on because I just got a sweet deal, and the lens that came with it was worth a ton of money. The lens was actually worth way more than the camera. So sometimes you can part those out and get even more. Sometimes I do sell them as a bundle as well, but cameras are really good. There is just a bunch of things and nuances that can be wrong. I've noticed I have a lot more returns and partial refunds on eBay with cameras because there's so many little nuances, and then camera buyers and owners as well are really picky about that stuff because I guess, if there's any sort of scratch on the lens or smudge, that's going to affect photo quality. So it's one of those things that there's a lot more stuff that could trip you up, but these do net me a lot of profit. So honestly, I'd have to put this in the A tier. Like I said, some of my best flips ever have been cameras. They're easy to ship. There's a bunch of them out there. You can easily find cameras to flip. So I'll go ahead and put cameras in the A tier. I'd say they're in between B and A, but I think A is the right call there. Next up is cracked devices, and not even just cracked, but all sorts of damaged devices, whether it be a charging port issue, whether it be, the back is shattered, one of the cameras isn't working. These are some of my favorite things to buy, and I used to not even buy them. But then once I started selling on eBay, I realized there's such a market for devices like this because there's so many people that do repairs, refurbishing companies that are just constantly looking for devices that are cracked or have issues because they can buy so many and they already have these machines that are really expensive. Obviously, with the newer iPhones with the ceramic backs, you have to have a laser machine to go in there and remove those. And so people who are doing a large quantity can make a lot of money buying these. And for that reason, they're actually pretty easy to sell and they don't knock off as much of the price as you would think. So you have your general public selling devices. They think they're not worth as much, when in reality, these cracked devices are actually worth a lot more than people think. So these are some of my highest profit margins. They're easy to find, easy to ship, and they move really quick. I hate inventory that sits around. For that reason, this will be our first S tier edition. One of my favorite things, if not my favorite thing to get my hands on, cracked iPhones, maybe even sometimes multiple issues, because I just have such good margins on those. Next up will be drones, specifically the DJI drones. I believe that's the only brand of drone I've bought, and I've bought multiple of these. I've had some that are brand new. I've had some that are locked to owner. It's kind of annoying. They have some sort of software. If the person who's selling it to you doesn't remove from their account, it's essentially an iCloud lock and you have to sell it for parts. I learned that the hard way once. That being said, there's some pretty good margins on these. These hold their value pretty well. They're also really expensive to begin with. So the more expensive an item is, oftentimes the more resale value you'll have, higher margins as well. Higher margins mainly is the main point there, because obviously if it goes for more, there's more wiggle room for you to get a profit. So overall, I don't see too many of these, but the ones I've gotten have been pretty good outside of that one locked one I mentioned. So I'd probably go ahead and put these in the B tier. I think they're a pretty good thing to look for. And if you're not already flipping these, I would definitely add it to your bag of things to be looking for. Next up, we'll talk about the DS. And while the DS is, almost an ancient technology at this point, I will say that sometimes you can get a pretty good deal. I sold a 2DS XL recently for over $200. I was surprised it was even going for that. And on top of that, I got a whole bunch of games and stuff with it that I was able to just sell as a lot. And sometimes those games hold their value pretty well. Same thing with some of the accessories. So if you can get this in like a bundle, or even the 2DS XL or some of the other XL models that I imagine hold their value better than probably the DS Lite or the original DS, then these are a good thing to flip. It all just kind of depends on the model. Now, I will say there's not that many of them going around, but again, it's all about finding a good deal, trying to get a bundle with them, which a lot of people would be doing at this point. You can usually get some games with them, and that's where you can make a lot of your money. So I would probably go ahead and put this in the B tier. Next up is the GameCube, which is pretty much the same exact situation as the DS. However, I will say GameCube games seem to go for a lot more than the DS. So I would prefer GameCube if games are included, but the console itself isn't really worth that much. I think those go for like $80, which after shipping and then trying to buy it for like $20 to make, just a $50, $45 profit at that point. Not the best thing to flip ever, but the games do go for a ton. So if you're getting bundles with games, then this would be something that I would also put in the B tier. Next up will be gaming laptops, and I get a fair amount of gaming laptops, believe it or not. And it's hard to say because there's such a wide range of these as well. There's a million different brands. Some of them are really expensive. The bad thing with gaming laptops is they do depreciate rapidly. So when people reach out trying to sell these, a lot of times they don't like the quote just because they usually paid way more for it than they're getting on the back end. And you try to explain it to people, but unfortunately they don't really care. They just want the most money back because a lot of people buy these and then never use them, go back to a PC, go back to a gaming console, whatever it may be. That being said, I usually do pretty well with these and I buy a fair amount of these every single month. And I'd say on average, I probably make about $100 on every one of these I buy. And so for it being easy to ship, the amount of quantity I'm getting, and the average margin, I would have to say this is probably an A tier device for me. Next up is the Garmin watch, and they have some newer ones like the Tactics, I believe it's called, which go for a lot. So it's definitely something to keep your eye out for. There's not many of these on the market, however, and in my personal experience of reselling these, I haven't done exceptionally well, but I have sold them before, so I threw them on this tier list. Just another thing to look out for. Maybe I just haven't searched hard enough to find good deals for these, but in general, I've had pretty low margins and I just haven't come across many of them. And so for that reason, I'll put it in the C tier. Next up is GoPros. And while a lot of your older GoPros just aren't worth anything, some of the new ones are obviously kind of the same thing with anything. And while I don't find many of these either, there can be good profits from time to time. And I'd probably have to rank it similarly in the C tier as well. Next up is PC parts, specifically your GPUs and CPUs. Now, some of the annoying caveats with these are they're really hard to test, and you're likely not just going to have like a build setup minus the GPU or CPU and then throw it in there. So you're kind of just banking on the fact that it works. Now, maybe there's a way to test these that I don't know about, but obviously there's some risk involved there. Now, there is some pretty good margins with these, especially because PC parts go for a lot, depending on what part it is, of course, but your main parts like CPU and GPU do go for a good bit. However, there is a lot of risk with buying these, so just because of the potential risk and downside, I'd probably put these in the C tier as well. Next up will be Guitar Hero guitars, which is super nostalgic for me, not because I played on them, but because I used to just sell these way back in the day before I was even selling iPhones like I do now. And these are a really good item to flip. Now, some of the caveats are it's pretty hard to ship because it's weird and it's kind of an oblong shape. But if you can find some good boxes for these, you can ship them off and it's not even that expensive to do. Bundle them with some Guitar Hero games as well if you're able to do so. And you can make a pretty good profit on these. I used to make pretty good money, and I'd say I probably made over $1,000 back in high school just flipping Guitar Hero stuff. Something I'd always look for on Marketplace. That being said, today, I'm not sure that I would really recommend looking for these too much. It's something, yeah, every now and then, if you're having a slow day, just throw it in on Marketplace and see if there's any posted. But in general, just for the amount of work it takes to ship and then trying to pair it with games for more value, probably not worth it. You're not going to see many of these anyways, but if you do, they're typically undervalued. You can get a good deal on these. A lot of them are still going for over $100, like the Xbox one specifically. So if you're able to get your hands on those, do it. But in general, I would have to put this in the C tier. Next up is iCloud, but every now and then you get some that are worth something. Next up is the Samsung. Samsungs are pretty good. I would say I don't like flipping them as much as the Pixel. Samsungs to me are just such a wide range. For example, your like S24, S25 Ultras and your Z Folds, Z Flip newer models are in pretty high demand. They're easy to sell. Carrier locked, unlocked, doesn't really matter too much. You can get those gone. Damaged ones don't go for as much compared to like the Apple ones. They're just not in as high demand. Pretty much across the board, outside of the Ultras, Folds, and Flips, they just depreciate worse. They're in less demand. Your S25, like the base models, the Pluses, they're kind of just a pain. People aren't really buying them. I always seem to make less than I think on Samsungs. That being said, there's a bunch of them out there, a lot of profits to secure, and definitely something you should be flipping if you're not, but I just can't put it on par with some of the A tier stuff, so I'd have to go B tier for Samsung. And kind of sticking to that theme is the Samsung tablet. I just couldn't put it on quite at the same level as the iPad. And then, Samsung has so many weird models. They'll have like the S9 Plus, and then they'll have like an A9 Plus, and the price difference is huge. And so you'll be tripped up for sure if you're not paying close attention to that. And I would just go ahead and put this in the B tier. It's pretty much just a step down from an iPad. Same thing though. Kind of the same situation. Now, your Samsung Galaxy watches, these, for some reason, just go for nothing. The resale value is terrible. Outside of the Ultra, I almost don't even buy these just because they're worth basically nothing. In my opinion, they're just such a pain. People are always reaching out to me with these, and I've pretty much just started passing on these. So they're kind of down here with AirPods. Obviously, I've made some money on them, but in general, I would say they're D tier. Something to look out for, but don't expect to make a ton of money with them. It's just kind of my 2 cents on that. They're probably, in between C and D, if I had to say. But I just don't like these, so I'm going to throw them D. Next up is sealed devices, specifically Apple stuff. Sealed Apple stuff is great, and if you're in the business long enough, you'll end up just getting your hands on a bunch of sealed stuff because, well, people typically just buy stuff and don't pay it off, which sucks for, obviously, the companies that's being bought from, but there's just always sealed stuff in circulation, in my opinion. Anywhere you go, you'll end up finding stuff if you just stick with it long enough. And sealed stuff is great to buy because you can just ship it straight to a direct buyer. You don't have to check. You don't have to worry if there's something wrong with it that you missed. pretty much just put it in my tracking sheet and then ship it off. So these are great. I would put these up with S tier, really good profit margins on these. And it's super easy to check, to deal with, because there's pretty much nothing you have to do. The only thing you have to really be worried about is fakes that are sealed. And then of course, people maybe opening and then resealing. I would say obviously a fake is pretty easy to spot once you've been doing this long enough. As far as the resealed thing goes, I've never had an issue with that, but just pay really close attention and look at those little tear strips on the bottom to make sure that it hasn't been tampered with. Next up, we've got the Valve Index VR. This is one that I find almost never, maybe like once every month or two, but when I do, it's always insane profits because they've got these base stations and trackers that come with it that for whatever reason just resell for a ton of money. And again, you want to part out everything with this one. So the controllers are like $200, the headset's $200, base stations are like $150, and then the trackers go for a ton as well. So I almost never find this one, but when I do, it's huge profits. So this one has to go S tier. I mean, it's not something you're going to find every day, but when you do, it's like Christmas morning. So you definitely want to be looking for those. Not super common, but definitely the best profit margins of anything on this list. And so this is now the Valve Steam Deck. That was the Valve Index. The Steam Deck is basically just like the ROG Ally, like I was saying earlier. It's like a handheld PC gaming system. And so with it being so similar, I would have to get it essentially the exact same rank, which, where did I put it? B tier. Okay. Yeah, it's pretty much the same thing. One thing you got to be careful with here is there's different models. So you have an LCD versus an OLED. Obviously the OLED's much better than the LCD. So that's the one you want to be prioritizing, but I've made profits on both of them. Next up is video games. And like I've talked about in the past, some of your DS, Nintendo, GameCube stuff will be worth a lot. PS1 games as well can be worth a ton. PS4 games and, your Xbox games on average are just not worth anything. And the average amount of video games you see, just not worth that much. So I wouldn't be going out trying to find video game lots. It's something you could look for. Maybe it's some more retro stuff or Nintendo stuff, but in general, video games are not something I'm reselling. I just don't find it worth the time. And plus you have so many small items that you have to ship out and make like a couple bucks on. I just don't think it's worth it. Even selling lots as a whole, probably a hard thing to profit on. I think it's just a much different business model if you're trying to do that than what I teach and do myself. So I'd have to put this at D. Next up is the MetaQuest. MetaQuest is a super solid flip. It's probably the most common VR headset that's owned. So naturally, you're going to find the most amount of these. Pretty easy to test, reset, do whatever with. The Quest 2, the Quest 3, the Quest 3S, those are the main ones that I've resold. I know there's like a newer one as well. I haven't even bought one of those yet, but in general, kind of the same process as all the VR. You part out the headset and the controllers. Easy to sell because they're so common. Profit margins aren't that amazing, typically, in my opinion, but definitely something you can get a large quantity of. And so it's just a nice little like $60, $70, $80, here and there. It's something you get pretty much on the weekly at this point. So I'd go ahead and put that in the B tier. Next up is the Apple Watches, and specifically the newer ones, and the Apple Watch Ultras are really good. Obviously, you're going to have a bunch of people trying to sell their older Apple Watches. For some reason, everyone's selling me their Apple Watch SE these days, and they're just worth nothing. And so everyone hates getting quoted on those, but it just is what it is. I've got to make money on it as well, obviously. Apple Watch Ultras are like S tier for me. And then like the older Apple Watches are literally just D tier because they're not worth anything. And so with that large sliding scale, I'd probably lean more towards B tier, but because I do get a larger quantity of Ultras and I make pretty good returns on those, I'd go ahead and put Apple Watches in the A tier with an emphasis on the Apple Watch Ultra. It's something I'd definitely be looking for, buying all the time. I get a bunch of these, probably in the top 3 or 4 of the items that I resell, and just great profits every time. Apple Watch Ultra are probably making about $100 or so on each one. Super easy to test, just kind of like any Apple device. If you've done one, you can do them all. This is the Xbox One now. And so this would be your Xbox One, Xbox One S. Obviously, there's a large scale there. Your Xbox One, the original one, I wouldn't even buy at this point. bought your Xbox One S, the Xbox One S Digital, the Xbox One X, you can buy these for like 30, 40 bucks because people have them sitting around. Everyone's gone next gen at this point, so you can flip these pretty easily. That being said, not great margins, so I'd probably put it in the C tier. It's kind of like the PS4 at this point. Not worth that much, but it's something you should definitely buy when presented the opportunity to do so. Xbox Series X, make sure I'm right on that one because this is the Series S right here. This one is a step above that. It's kind of on par with the PS5, which I did put in the B tier, so I would just naturally do the exact same thing. For the Xbox Series X, your next gen stuff, it's worth a good bit more. Series S, I would do the exact same thing. So it's not as good as the X because the X is worth a little bit more, but these are both stuff that you can ship pretty easily. Find a box that fits them well. I like that it's square as opposed to the PS5, which is just the most ridiculous shape ever. It's like they wanted it to be hard to ship for us, but anyways, I put them on the same level as the PS5. They're all about the same, similar price points. Again, the Xbox Series S would be a little bit worse, but something that's pretty quick and easy to sell, generally pretty good profit margins. And that's going to conclude the list. If there's something I missed on here, let me know in the comments below, and I'll start looking for that and let you know what I think about flipping those items. But this is pretty much everything I've flipped within the last 3-4 months or so. I've probably bought at least one of everything on here. As a matter of fact, I definitely have. So these are things that I'm actively buying. Obviously, some are more common than others. These are things I would recommend you buy as well to make the most money doing this. Again, I make over $10,000 a month in profit doing this. And if you want to learn how, I made a free 6-hour course on my channel. And I'll actually link it below so you can check it out. On top of that, I've got a free school group you can join. If you want to network with me, other phone flippers, ask some questions, figure out how to get in the game. Me and some of the members in there would love to help you get started. So go ahead and do that. Start your flipping journey if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys in the next one. iCloud locked is really annoying. Obviously, there's no way around it, but it is still something you can buy and ship to direct buyer. These can't go on eBay. There's also going to be less direct buyers that'll take them if it has the lost mode on. I don't even really recommend buying these, but it's just like, if someone forgets their password, you have to restore it and just get what you can for it, the parts. Now, the newer models like the 16 Pro Max, 15, 16s, those will still give you a decent return. But really, the problem with iCloud Locked is it's just such a significant devaluer of the device since it pretty much just bricks the entire system. It's just so hard to find profit with these. A lot of people that have them too are going to be older devices. So it's pretty rare that you make any money with iCloud. That being said, there's probably 1 or 2 a month I get on average, maybe even less than that. But I still find these from time to time. If you can get a good deal on it, you can make a little bit of money, and it's pretty easy to ship off. You don't have to do anything. You don't really have to check anything. And so I'd say it's probably just above D, and I'd put it in the C tier. Next up will be iPads. iPads are pretty much just the same as phones, just a little bigger, maybe a little more of a pain to ship, but generally speaking, they're easy to check. They're pretty good profits on average, and you're going to find a lot of them. And so with that being said, I'd go ahead and just put iPads in the A tier. I think they're a great thing to flip. There's a large quantity of them out there. You can make a pretty good return on each one. Phones, pretty much the exact same thing. I would put your normal phones just below the cracked devices because I do think the cracked devices are just a better return on average. That being said, phones, cracked or not, are a really great thing to flip. But with the cracks being how good they are, I would put your typical, B grade phone a little bit below your cracked devices. Next up will be MacBooks. I think MacBooks are maybe on par, if not slightly worse than the other two, but I don't know if it's worse enough for me to put it in the B grade. The downfalls to MacBooks are just the variation, so it's a little bit harder to price them compared to your iPads and iPhones. Your direct buyers aren't typically taking used MacBooks, at least not at a good price that I've found. So these are something that go on eBay. They make pretty good returns on average. I don't have too many issues with them, but I guess I'll still go A tier. The Apple stuff, it's easy to check. It all kind of works the same way. So I would have to put them above these three, but I would say if there was like a B plus tier, that's probably where I'd put those. Next up is HP and your other laptops. These are ones that are a lot harder to price because a lot of your Lenovo's, your HP's, your Dell's, they just spit out a million different products. And so it's almost impossible to actually price these. For some reason, I get hit up all the time with people trying to sell their HP's. And it's almost just like a headache moment for me because they don't sell well. There is profit to be made on them, of course, but I usually have to throw out a really low offer just because the resale value and depreciation is really bad on these as well. That being said, I buy my fair share of them. They make me money. And as much of a pain as they are to quote, it's something that you can definitely make a solid profit on. So I'd put it C tier. I wouldn't say it's as bad as AirPods, but it's definitely not as good as these either. Next up is the Microsoft Surface, which I would say is like a step above your HPs. And of course, with HPs, there's varying degrees of models. So if it's like a really nice new HP, then it's going to be more of a B to A tier. It's the same thing with the Microsoft Surface, although I will say on average, these are just slightly better. They're easier to price. This would be more of a C plus, but I think it gets the nod into a B just because it's easier to find the models, price them, give an accurate quote. And I would say there's a little more demand for them over the HPs and Lenovo's and Dell's and things of that nature. Of course, there's so many different types that it's hard to just lump them all into one category. But in general, that's how I would grade it. Next up is the Switch. Similarly to some of these other gaming consoles, the Switch is really good if you have games and accessories with it. Now, there's a lot of variations of the Switch. So Nintendo Switch Lite, the OLED, you've got the base model, and I think they just came out with the Nintendo Switch 2 as well, which I haven't gotten any of those yet, but all are on different levels of being good to flip or not. Obviously, the more expensive it is, the better it is. So your OLED's really good. The Switch 2, I imagine, will end up being very good here once there's more of those that hit the resale market. But your original Switch, and especially the Nintendo Switch Lite, they don't go for as much anymore. So you're throwing out a pretty low offer. In general, people aren't really willing to take those just because if you're offering, 30 to 50 bucks on a Switch, it just doesn't seem like a fair amount for something you could just keep and play once a month or something. So I would say the Switch in general is a B tier, especially with games, a lot of accessories. You can really up the value of what you're buying. But in general, the original model, mainly just being so inexpensive now, is probably a huge reason this isn't higher on the list. Next up, I've got the Google Pixel. I actually really like flipping the Google Pixel. I don't buy many of them, but when I do, I usually have a pretty good experience, and it's pretty similar to an iPhone or Samsung in terms of checking. Easy to list, easy to identify and price, and while the quantity isn't super high, it's still a really solid flip, and I would probably put this in the A tier. With the Google Pixel is the Google Pixel Watch, which I've found very few of, but when I do, again, pretty solid experience, pretty easy to navigate, test everything, see that it's working, and then not too hard of a sell on the back end either. So I'd probably go ahead and put this B tier just because I don't find that many of them and they're not extremely valuable. But when I do find them, I've had some solid profits there. Next up is the PlayStation VR headset. So I actually just bought one of these. I've bought a couple in the past. With VR headsets, the trick is just to part them out. So sell the controllers separately, then the headset. You're going to end up netting a little more. The reason for that is because people are going to break a headset or break the controllers and they have to buy new ones. And so they're going to look on eBay and they're probably willing to pay a little more. And so that's why you want to part those out. You actually make more doing that in my experience with all VR headsets. So that's why I do that. This one isn't one that I find very common, but you can make a solid profit on it. And I know they're coming out with more of these as well. So I know there's a VR1, VR2. There might even be more. I'm not even sure. I don't buy many of these, but I'd say in general, these are a solid B tier flip. Next up is the PlayStation 4. And unfortunately, the PS4 just isn't going for as much as it was anymore. I'd say back in the day, this is probably a much better flip. Now, it's just not worth as much. You're offering like 30, 40 bucks. It's kind of the same thing as a Switch. People are like, it still works. 30, 40 bucks. Is it even worth getting rid of at that point? For some people it is, but for a lot of people it's not. And then to make, 50, 60 bucks, you got to be buying it at 30 or 40. So the games aren't extremely valuable either. And for that reason, I just go ahead and put this in a C tier. It's hard to get a lot of value out of PS4s in my opinion. And that brings us to the PS5, which of course is just a step above the PS4 because it's worth more. Games are worth more. The controllers are worth more. And it's pretty much the same process for shipping it. So this is a pretty easy B tier in my opinion. Next up will be the ROG Ally. So I've bought a couple of these. I don't know if they're ROG or ROG. I really have no clue. But these are kind of similar to the Steam Deck, which we'll see later on. It's a handheld gaming console, almost like the PSP back in the day, but it's more of like a PC than gaming console. It's like a handheld PC versus like a handheld gaming console, if that makes sense. These are pretty good. I don't find too many of them, but it's something you could definitely look for if you're having a slow day. I would recommend you try and get your hands on some of these. Pretty solid profits, typically around $100. Ship out really well, and they're in pretty high demand, so not hard to find buyers for these at all. I would go ahead and put these in the B tier. Next up is Wi-Fi routers. These are things that I buy very seldom, just because most of them don't resell well. That being said, when I do, I've made solid profits on them, so not a ton of quantity out there, but pretty standard to buy. I actually just bought a Netgear little AT&T one. It's compact, small, easy to ship out, make solid profits on it. Not something you're going to find every day, but when you do, it's a pretty solid thing to flip depending on the brand. Of course, there's a lot of junker brands as well that I just wouldn't touch at all. I'd say it's a C tier, probably on the higher end of C's, but again, it all just depends what model you're getting. A lot of routers are just worthless.